Hello, this is Russ Ouellette again. Thanks for joining us. I'm continuing the discussion with Dr. Michael Moore about culture and some of the ideas that we have around culture and how important it is for the organization. The dissertation was about that networking and political acumen, not bad political acumen, but good political acumen, and vast relationships. People have more relationships means that they have more power, and that the strength of that relationship. My theory was that the stronger our relationship is with somebody. So if you have colleagues, if you have 50 LinkedIn connections that you're really close to, let's say, and by the way, only human beings can only really have 100 real connections. After that, they forget, they don't know, right? Like if you look through your stuff, you'll say, who are these people? I don't remember those people, because our brains can only handle 100, which is why throughout history, communities were always little towns and communities were about 100, right? But anyways, my theory was that the closer these relationships were, the deeper that they were, the more value that we would exchange for that relationship. So, Michael, you and I are best friends, right? Which means that I would think that you and I would trade resources better. I would do more things for you, you'd do more things for me. And that the weaker the relationship was, we would do less. And my whole premise was that the future of the organization was about having strong relationships, and that the stronger the relationships were in the organization, the more productivity they would have. That's kind of like the overall theme. And it kind of makes sense, right? But there was research done throughout the 50s and the 60s that you've heard of 6 degrees of separation. You've heard of that before, right? The research showed that the weaker ties, the weaker your relationships were with people, the more value you got from them. And I thought that's old fashioned. We've evolved from that. That's what my theory was. So I tested Business Network International dyads. So there's a bunch of these all over the place. And I went in and I measured the relationship strengths within those groups. And then they actually measure the referrals that they give to each other. I measured those referrals and determined that the weaker the ties, the more value people provide to each other. And that's weird, right? But what is that if you're my best friend, I don't have to impress you anymore. Right? I don't have to impress you. I already got you. You're already you're already living in my cave with me, right? But but to survive, I really need to know the people in that other community and those people that are trading these other things. And I need to have these other resources. And because I don't know them, I'm trying to win them over all the time. So therefore, I'm going to give them more value, and that's pretty cool. So I don't know. So I proved myself wrong. I was disappointed about the outcome, because I like to think that we're evolving into this better place where relationships are better, but that's not how it turned out. But anyway, still good, still interesting.
So your dissertation was in 2008, really before social media started taking off, where we have way more loose connections than we've ever had before. For my LinkedIn, I have 700 connections. I personally know maybe 25 or 30 of them, but they're resources for me. If I need something, I can reach out to them and say, hey, we have similar interests. I'm working on this. Do you think you might be able to provide resources? So do you think that if you were to examine your dissertation topic in 2022, that it would only reinforce your findings, or do you think that it would have shifted more towards your original hypothesis?
No, I still think my original hypothesis was wrong. I still believe that, I'll do a favor for my neighbor more readily than I'll do for my brother. Why? Because my brother's a pain in the neck, and I already know him so much, and I assume what he knows, right? But my neighbor, I want my neighbor to like me, and I want my neighbor to let me use his excavator, and I want so that dynamic's not going to go away. But when I did this, social media was really just taking off, and I remember saying at the time publicly, I remember saying and writing about it, that social media was going to provide us all this value, and we're going to have more relationships and all this other stuff, and I think that there is a limit to that. So I have, like you, I have 1,000 or more people on LinkedIn that I'm linked into, right? And to be honest with you, I don't know who these people are. I met them at a conference, I met them at a talk. They were employees at a company I worked for. I've probably met them, but I don't remember them. because my brain is not capable of remembering all those resources. So to some extent, I think there's a what's the phrase? There's not a return on investment after so many. And I don't know about you, but I mean, personally, my Facebook account and my LinkedIn account, I do accept people on LinkedIn, but my Facebook account is pretty much just my friends now, like the people that I feel that I want, that I have a connection to. I'm not using it for resource development, or I'm not using it for, political power. I'm not using it for whatever. I'm using it because it's my heart's there, right? Like I get to see my kids and, my in-laws' children, and I get to see my cousins, and I get to see close friends and talk to them. So, and I think that, I actually think LinkedIn, again, I've talked about before, LinkedIn is a model of what's going to happen in the future. It's really a sloppy way of doing it, but we're all on there. We're all using it for connections and to gain resources, and that's really worth it for sure. But I think it's a sloppy version of what's coming in the future. What's coming in the future is a more refined version of that, where it'll be more useful and more real and more relevant. How many LinkedIn invitations do you get that as somebody, and I don't blame them, because LinkedIn, the whole premise of LinkedIn is I'm going to be on LinkedIn, therefore I want to be LinkedIn and I want to be connected to people. So therefore I'm going to provide value. And if they ask me for value, I'll respond to that, right? That's the ground rules. That's the game. But how many times, I must get at least 3 or 4 LinkedIn invitations a week saying, hey, listen, I know you're an executive coach and I can help you find clients. I see that we have a lot in common. I'd like to link in with you. Well, I don't know these people. And so should I really connect with them? Should I really do that? So I think that we have to refine it a little bit better and get it to be a little bit more real and relevant. So to answer your question, in the future, I think we'll refine these systems better, but we're probably only going to have a certain amount of close, strong and weak ties that we readily connect and work with. Yeah, that's what I think. So it'd be interesting to do that research again and find out, right? And so my whole idea about social media being this thing that was going to greatly change our society for the good, I still think it's possible, but the sloppiness of it so far is not proving out. It's not good for mental health. It's, it's this, even the stuff we're doing here on YouTube, hopefully we're trying to provide value, but how much stuff out there is just not good. How much are we looking at screens? How much are we, what endorphins we get out of every ding we get from our phone or computer, right? I think that stuff's going to change in the future, where we'll learn how to manage this stuff better. Like I don't usually carry my phone anymore with me. I try to put my computer away on weekends and not look at it. Important people that need to connect to me know how to get to me if they need to. I'm trying to less screens, less time doing that stuff. I think all of us want to do that, and I think we'll evolve to manage this a little bit better.
Russ, last week you talked about culture. We went over, some of the paradigm shifts that you expect to take place. Can you just talk to us a little more about culture and your perspective on how culture really is going to be impacting future workers?
We're seeing a really good example of culture problems when we think about actually what's going on in Europe right now, right? We have 2 different cultures that are really kind of it's broken out in war because the cultures are so different, and I'll explain maybe a little in a minute. But the way I look at culture is there's kind of 2 components: this culture and this climate, right? And I think last time I talked about we have a nature and we have a personality. And about in a macro level, we have this environment, right? And then in between, we have culture, right? Well, I think of the environment as the climate part of it, right? So climate is, an organization exists in an industry. And within that industry, there's certain norms and there's certain laws and rules that have to be followed. There's certain things that kind of make up that environment. So that's kind of the climate part of it. And climates have norms and behaviors and motivations that are already built into it, right? So, for example, the climate of law has hourly billing, which is a norm of how they get paid, right? Hourly billing is kind of the premise, and then shareholder distribution and the compensation program that's all built in that. That's all kind of climate stuff, right? The culture is the things that are going on inside the organization, right? And those things, those culture and climate things, can be managed to some extent. And I want to talk to you a little bit about those variables, but let's just kind of think about culture as part of as part of the system, not the system, right? It's a component of the organizational system. So there's that whole concept of the wolves of Yellowstone. Like, I don't know if you've heard this story before, but Yellowstone at one time the wolves were gone because the people that settled there destroyed them, right? Just like the buffalo were gone, the wolves were gone, right? And what happened was you'd go there and there wasn't trees by the rivers, and the wildlife wasn't in balance, and we didn't know any different, but that's what it was. When we introduced wolves back into Yellowstone, what happened was the wolves started killing more of the coyotes, which started, stalking the other game. And what happened was the deer and those kind of animals had to be sneaky around the river. They couldn't browse on the river so readily. So trees around the river developed. And when trees around the river developed, there were more mammals and birds, arrived, right? Which meant that there was a diversity of plant life, and there was a diversity of animals. And the wolves kind of put things back in balance, so it became this really lush, kind of different environment. And what that did is made the rivers change directions, right? Now this is all, that's not my field, but there's lots of videos you can go find on that, which is really fascinating. And basically, it's kind of an example of how there's a climate, right? The climate exists around, in Yellowstone. It's got weather patterns, and it's got and it also has creatures there that have a nature of what they do. But putting the wolves in changed kind of the behaviors and the norms of that little ecosystem. So you're going to think about, I would just like to think about culture in that way. The culture is the things that you do to your company that have an effect, throughout, right? And so the wolves on the Yellowstone is an example of a system and how a system can be affected. Culture is made up of really three kind of things. So norms and behaviors are what we think of normally, like, how we do work, how do we do things around here? The things the things we say to each other, the stories we tell. That's kind of what we think of as like the primary. That's the thing we identify, right, as culture. And underlying that culture is motivations and controls. There are things like, what are the motivations for people to actually behave that way, and what are the norms to do that, right? And what we physically see are the symbols. We see the things that are there. So if I can think of a company, Next Step Bionist and Prosthetics, which is a company that I've worked with for a long time, and Greg, these people are really kind of cool and amazing, and if you think about their culture, the motivations and controls are: we want to take care of patients no matter what. We relate to our patients so they understand us. We don't pay commissions to people. People work there because they love the work, and that's like the motivations and the way that kind of works, right? The norms and behaviors are going to be affected by those motivations. So the norms are: customers come first, clients come first, patients come first, always first, right? We all team together to work on whatever they're going to do, right? We create casual relationships, not casual, but very personal relationships with people. We go above and beyond for stuff. The behaviors and the norms inside is this free communication. It's very, very transformational, right? There's no rank doesn't seem to be a problem. People don't act differently because the boss is in the office or not, right? And the symbols we see, the symbols out of that are, if you walk around, you'll see pictures of the owner of the company, and they'll have cropped and put some funny picture of him on the wall playing golf, and it's like they gave him a bobblehead for Christmas, there's the symbols of these silly little things that come out of that really cool, relaxed culture. Other symbols are, you walk in and there's a whole room for kids, and the whole wall's painted with animals, and it's like this whole the symbol of we're really welcoming you here, right? Like is right there for you to see. You feel it, the energy as soon as you walk in, as soon as you talk to the person in front of you. So that's kind of what culture is. Now the question is, like how do you control it? So is it just, companies should just put a room in their office with painting of animals? Would you think that'll change the culture, right? Well, how about we put a foosball in the break room? Maybe we put a foosball in the break room. Now all of a sudden it would be a cool kind of high-tech company, right? That's not the way it works, right? It's the norms and behaviors based on the motivations and controls that create the symbols. It's not the symbols create these other things. If I can give you another example, a law firm once came to us and said, we want to be like a kind of a Silicon Valley company. We want to be kind of hip and cool. And they didn't say that. They said they wanted to be kind of contemporary and modern and be relevant to a younger generation of people and prospects. And they just wanted to be modern and that. And what they said was, we want to be like we think of like Silicon Valley. That's the way we think of it. Well, Silicon Valley, so you can't just take an old blue shoe, law firm and just transfer the total transformation to be a Silicon Valley company. You can, but it's not what they thought, right? So they went off and toured some Silicon Valley companies and came back and said, they have beer in the kitchen and they have stage in the middle of the office, and there's not walls around the offices anymore, and there's climbing walls on the walls, and there's no, it's very relaxed and it's like very casual and nobody gets dressed up. Well, they went and saw that and said, the thing that's changing their culture is that they have beer and they have a climbing wall. So how do we do that? And I remember thinking, you're not going to change your culture by putting a climbing wall in your office or making these little symbolic changes. It's got to fundamentally come from thinking through several variables about the company. Anyways, they didn't like my advice. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they changed since then. But another example is I had the company that makes the scales on the highways, and I don't know, there's a couple companies that make scales on the highways. So when you pull your truck off to the side of the road and they weigh the trucks, right? Well, this particular company made these scales, and they called me for a consult. They wanted to know, we want to, they went to a workshop and they said, we want to change our culture because we know it's about transformation, and they said all the right stuff, like totally cool, good. Let's think about transformational leadership. Let's talk about how to create that kind of motivation. Let's talk about how to create those kind of norms and behaviors within the company. And when I started out, so I had a consult with them, and I had all the executives in the room, and I said, so tell me about your company. And they said, well, they're skilled craftsmen that have been here for 30 years, most of them. We have some engineers that have, a lot of people have been here a long time, and we want to empower them. I'm like, okay, so. And as I got into this, I realized that it's probably not a right thing to do, because if somebody has been working 30 years in a machine shop, let's say, right? And there's no judgment about this, or this is very common. You take an engineer and you say, hey, engineer, you're now empowered to do whatever you want. You take anybody that's been doing something for a long time and say all of a sudden, and they're doing very particular focused work, right? Like they know their job, they do it well, and now you tell them they're empowered. They don't know how to do that. It's not something that people can all of a sudden shift the behavior. So what happens a lot of time is when people promote engineers to leaders in a company, a lot of times those leaders don't stay because that's not what they want. They never wanted to be a leader. It seems like the next thing to do, but they leave. It's the same thing with, having a bunch of employees that, have been working for a long time, very happily, by the way, doing a great job. And all of a sudden you want to change your culture to be transformational. It's not that easy. Organizational psychology, right? I've been disappointed about, as I got into it, and maybe you have too, that there's only so many tricks in the book about, how to change things. There's a couple theories that, we know about, right? There's the rational thinking, rational thinking theories, right? Which is like, bureaucracy, Taylorism, Weberism, it's about the org chart, it's about command and control, authority, right? Policies and procedures. That's kind of the old-fashioned way of thinking about work. That is called the rational system, right? That's called a rational system. And that is, And it works in some, it worked for centuries. It worked for a long time. It worked throughout the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it worked fine. But you can see today that might be like, it might not, we're moving away from that, because like when I have a manufacturing company call me and they say they want to be a transformational company, we're making way, right? People are starting to think about this stuff in a different way. That's good. And then there's this, if you go way to the other side of the spectrum, you have natural systems thinking, right? Or natural systems theory, which is basically says, this was popular during the 50s, right? It's like, Mary Parker Follett and a lot of other theorists talked about this in a good way. And it actually wasn't Mary Parker Follett that she actually fixed and brought people back to earth regarding some of this stuff. But the thought was, let's just give people a goal, and people are smart enough to figure it out. Let them just go figure it out. Let them just, if you put 5 people in a room and we give them a task, they'll figure it out, right? And it makes sense that they would, right? But what happens in that, when you start adding motivators and other climate considerations, what happens is people start to politic, they start to compete. We're human beings. We have a nature, and the nature is to do some of these things. And left to its own devices, we're not always going to behave really well, right? So that was kind of the way I like to think about this is like there was an old show that used to be on Mad Men, which was about an ad agency in the 60s. I don't know if you ever saw that, Michael, right? It kind of shows the natural systems thinking. These executives did whatever they want. They all had a bar in their office. People took long 3-hour cocktail lunches, and the culture was very open, and people didn't necessarily, that was of course drama, but it emphasizes the thinking that, let's let people do what they need to do, and they'll be fine, right? Now back then they had different cultures to control some of this stuff, but you see what I'm saying, right? The problem is that when you left people to their own devices, it's not necessarily, we are going to maybe veer off target. We're going to, we don't necessarily always behave well. Having said that, the scholars at the time came up with this concept of, it's really contingency theory. It's really about contingencies. In other words, the best way to run an organization, or the best way to think about organizations, it's contingent. It depends on several variables. And there was this guy, Morgan, that wrote some book that I read in graduate school that basically laid out like a bunch of contingencies that you could measure, like dials that you could measure and you could think about. And that would kind of, give you an insight into what you could do to make the culture what you wanted it to be. There's no judgment here, right? There's nothing wrong with a manufacturing company having a rational way of thinking and organizing and behaving, right? It's completely functional when that culture works for what you're trying to do, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Likewise, a consulting firm, right? A small consulting firm that's filled with PhDs, right? It's going to be very natural. You're not going to have to control everything. Those people are all individual people that have their own needs and aspirations. And if you can get them to attach to your vision and mission, then they're going to work for you. And if you take care of them, they feel part of that, right? They can be. It'll work too. It can be very transformational. But it's somewhere in the middle is right where any particular company could be. So I'm just going to summarize this, and then maybe we'll go through some variables, right? So, for example, that law firm that wanted to be transformational, right, was really kind of a transactional organization. Law tends to be transactional, right? I'm going to write this stuff for you. I'm going to represent you in court. I'm going to do this research. You're going to pay me by the hour. That's the transaction, and it's there's no bones about it. That's how it works. And it works. It's worked for a long time. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And the people in that organization understand that, okay, right? And so that works fine. But the law firm said, you know what? I think we have a different kind of employee coming in, a different kind of lawyer. They want to be more empowered. They want to be more open, and they want to be more transformational, right? And we should do that. And I think that's they should. I agree. So they're thinking more on this, the natural school of thought, right? Like we have educated people coming in. They have their own desires. They have their own missions. Let's give them what they need in order to do that. The problem is that old organizational structure and climate and rules and motivators, right, will not work with people that want to be empowered and want to be transformational. You understand, right? So in other words, if I'm a lawyer and I've got these great ideas and I want to, practice law a certain way, and I only want to work certain hours because I have a family, which is, again, that's awesome. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I want to have a balanced life, and I like to also get involved a little bit in politics and maybe be involved in the community and all that, right? Well, that's good, but you still need to make your numbers. You need to sell and bring in a certain amount of clients, right? And you won't get paid unless you do that, right? Like you see, and I'm not generalizing. I'm just saying, for example, that's an example, right? When maybe you're going to change the compensation structure if you're going to have someone that's playing a different kind of role, right? Maybe there's going to be a different way of sharing. And I don't pretend to know the answer to this. I'm just trying to show you that difference, right? Let me give you a really basic example that's so blatant right now. We can kind of look at geopolitics a little bit sometimes, and we can kind of see these differences. So bear with me. I'm not a geopolitical expert. I'm just like any other citizen observing this from afar, but I'm observing it from my spectrum, from my perspective, which is organizational systems, right? I'm looking at it that way. And what we see is we have the West, which is NATO and the EU, which are open societies, right, that are democracies for the most part. And they have people in those in that system, right, that love like freedom, right? They want to make their own decisions about where they work. They want to make their own decisions about how they live. They want to have families, and they want their kids to do well. It's a democracy, and people in that democracy have a certain, they like it, right? There's a certain amount of like, this works for us. But I mean, it's not necessarily the ultimate system, but it's a system that seems to work, right? And they like that system. And so you get the Ukraine, which is moving towards being, more like NATO and the EU and the West, right? But now we have Russia, which you could argue isn't an open society as much, right? The system is not a democracy necessarily. There's a few people that have most of the wealth. They still behave a little bit like a democracy. But what we're seeing from their leaders is a totally different perspective. The old leadership of Russia, right, has more of a command and control, rational way of looking at the world. Bureaucracy, rules and regulations, loyalty, manage the press, right? This whole dynamic is different. So the people in Ukraine are more like the natural system was saying, well, we're transparent, we get to decide our own, we don't, we're not being pressed by somebody else, right? So just like a manufacturing firm that has rules and regulations and protocols and procedures, or any organization that has those things, right? And they're hiring a new order of people, a new younger generation that have different values and want to be self-actualized, right? That's not going to work, right? So a young lawyer who wants to go work for a law firm or wants to go work in law is going to go to a firm that has all these rules and regulations and the systems that don't work for them. It's the same thing that's going on now. Russia, the boss, if you will, is demanding that these employees, the Ukrainians, toe the line. And what happens is they can't admit that there's a different way of doing things. They can't see, the way to win the Ukrainians is their hearts and minds, not more rules and regulations. I mean, this is an extreme example, but you can see the illustration of it, right?
In that analogy, we're making a shift from culture to more about designated leadership styles. More, if you take, for example, Russia would be more a transactional leadership style, where maybe the West is possibly more transformational leadership.
Exactly. But what you need to know is the variables have to line up. So if they have authoritative organizational style, right, and they have rules and regulations to do everything, and the leadership is authoritative, it's all lined up, right? It's all kind of the same, right? Leadership is part of that system. So in this analogy, Putin is the authoritative leader in a transactional organization, where the Ukraine leader is a transformational leader. Listen to what he says on TV and listen to how he's leading these people through that, and how he's called people to action, right? He didn't tell them to go out and do that. He's saying he has their hearts and minds. He has they're thinking about their future. The leadership has to match the organizational system. And that's what I'm talking about, these variables. So first of all, so the variables are life cycle variables, like where we are in the life cycle, right? So if a company has been, if in the law, for example, has been around for a long time, the life cycle of that industry is old, right? Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's mature, right? So that's a different life cycle. But if a new law firm starts, they're kind of they're early stage life cycle. So knowing those differences is important, because if you want to be a new law firm, right, you can adopt new practices and new ways of thinking about employees and how you compensate people and the system that you work in. Now you can recreate it so you can be early stage. If you want to compete at the historical way of law, then you really kind of, you're going to think and behave like, a more mature organization that has all of this legacy behavior norms, right, and stuff that's going on. How you think about your product and service. Is your product and service a commodity? Well, if you're a commodity, you don't really need a lot of creativity or collaboration. You're printing out pens, or you're making car parts, or you're making, a product being a commodity, you would think differently about that organizational culture, right? If your product or service is like high value, then you would have another kind of norms and behaviors within that, right? So if you're selling, right now, the electric cars are kind of being a big thing, right? Like electric cars have this little bit of a vibe to them, and it's like modern and it's new, right? Those people making those new products, right? Those are not commodities right now. Those are kind of new, evolving, high-tech products, right? They're not necessarily just printing out a bunch of cars the same way they've been doing for 20 years. It's got to be a different culture that's doing those things. Is the organization stable or constantly changing, right? So the Chevy truck, and I'm not an expert in these industries, right? But if best example I can give is like a newspaper business it's been around for a long time, right? You went to work, you had the reporters do the stuff had to go to print by a certain time, the machines all went out and we delivered. It's a system that was very repetitive every day, and everybody knew what they were going to do every day. Doesn't change every day. When you go to work, pretty much everybody knew what they were going to do, right? In a new kind of modern kind of like Axios or these other kind of different kind of media news outlets, right? They're behaving totally different. They don't know where they're going to go. They don't know what they're going to do every day. Every day they have people changing, the social media, how they're connecting to people, what kind of products they're doing, like what shows they're going to be on. Like things are evolving all the time, right? So how that system, what the environment's like, right? If I'm a reporter for a local newspaper, I'm going to probably do the beat every day. If I'm a reporter for Axios, I might be in, Europe right now. Or I might, be part of a show that's on Showtime. Or I might be, standing in for, it's going to be a different kind of thing. So it depends on what what kind of changes are going on at any given time that's inside that system. That's also a contingent, right? Are systems technology-based, or are the systems requiring humans to do stuff? Some companies have lots of technology that they use, and it's really important that they use it, and it kind of helps produce work. Other organizations require really smart people, or really, really talented people, or skilled people doing particular things that they have to do, right? So you can think of a law firm as it really having people. You need smart people. Those are the machines that are doing the work, right? Where an accounting firm, you can probably do more, you can use more technology to kind of maybe do that work, right? Another one is how people are motivated. Are people motivated for the paycheck, right? Again, no judgment. People work for money. Are they motivated by the paycheck, or are they motivated by the work itself? Are people in law practicing law or being a doctor or a nurse for the money, or are they doing that work because they love the work, right? That example I gave before of Next Step Bionics and Prosthetics, they love the work, right? There's no doubt about them loving the work. Having said that, that culture is going to be different than people that are only working for the money. People only work for the money. You just have to pay them more money. You have to make sure their compensation plan works. You have to make sure that they have, the resources they need to be able to produce that return on investment. But people that work for the work, have different motivators. So that's important. How is the organizational designed? Is the organizational designed as a pyramid where I have to call into a person when I'm sick, or I have to, I have one person that I talk to about challenges or I work with every day? Or is it really, or is it open, kind of like an open system kind of thing where people can, it's more flat. It's not so, rigid as far as who communicates with people. And by the way, I'll tell you, whenever I work with somebody, I'll say, show me the org chart. Everybody's org chart looks like a pyramid. But when I ask them really who does the work, it's all over the map. So, the culture, that actual picture doesn't really tell you what it is. But how people behave and interact in that pyramid is what's important, right? And then the final variable is leadership. Is leadership authoritative or is it transformational? Is it transactional or transformational? And in that example I gave before, you could argue that Russia is an old company with old systems that's not transparent, that is got some people that have norms and behaviors. They don't know any different, right? They norms and behaviors, it works for them and they're fine with it and it's going fine. And they have a very authoritative leader. Wants to buy another company that has, that people, the transaction, they're more transformational people. They're motivated because they love their country. They're motivated because they love the freedom that they have. They have this perception that their freedom is a certain thing, and their leadership is transformational. When that company tries to go buy that other company, when Russia tries to buy the Ukraine, it's like, yeah, it's not a deal. And this is real. This happens in business too. So if you take a healthcare organization or any kind of organization, let's say a financial services firm, that is really transformational, right? That has their people are motivated by the work. They love the client work. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of good cultural norms and motivators and behaviors that are inside that culture that gets bought out. So what happens is they start seeing the big old firms coming to them, wanting to buy them. And when they do, and they look and see at that culture, we have all these rules. We're going to do things differently. We're going to change the rules. It's going to be totally different. You have to follow these rules now. It's very painful, which is why when we see mergers and acquisitions, right? There's really few mergers. Most of them are acquisitions, and to pretend that it's going to be this symbiotic thing is wrong. It's always going to be you're adopting someone else's culture. No matter how hard they try not to do that, the bigger the organization gets, the more old it is, the more there's going to be these old systems that are not going to be attractive to people that want to be transformational. So those are the variables. And what we can do is we can measure culture based on those variables.
So if we go back to your examples with the law firm going to Silicon Valley to look at workplaces, we can say that what's working for you now or what someone else does doesn't mean that's going to work for you. So really it's about understanding how you can change some of maybe small versions or small steps of your norms and behaviors to create that environment that you're looking for. Not everyone can be Google or Apple or other types of free environments. Not every organization can take away all the walls in the building. I worked for an organization whose corporate office everyone had an office, and then they decided to tear down everything and create these massive open spaces because that's what perceived to work. But what happened was you could no longer have a confidential conversation. If you wanted to have a personal conversation, like HR had to go into this special office where you had to reserve a time to have those type of conversations. So not every great change that has come out of Silicon Valley works for everyone. You need to understand what works best for your organization and maybe just take one small thing or one small behavior that you can change.
Yeah, exactly. You have it right. And the thing is that, so there is a show on HBO that is called Silicon Valley. And if you haven't seen it, it's hysterical. It makes fun of the Silicon Valley kind of culture. And it's definitely humor and comedy, but there are a lot of realities in that. There's a lot of real things going on in that show that they're exaggerating, right? Yeah, that's not going to work for everybody. And to think it does is ridiculous. And to think that a scale company should become this transformational thing that looks like, a Silicon Valley company is ridiculous. And it's ridiculous to think that, I can run a consulting firm with all PhDs to give them all kinds of rules and regulations. It won't work, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. And so there's got to be, it's contingent. It depends on, these variables are all have to line up right. And then when they line up right, you can figure out what to do. So example, and just a couple of little, things that are interesting. People complain, well, Walmart has a lot of turnover, so they must be a terrible company to work for, right? No, that's how it's designed. No one goes to work for Walmart forever. It's a stop on the way to somewhere else, right? It's the extra money that they need because their contract didn't come through. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if they have turnover rate, I don't know what it was, but I think at one time it had to be like, it's a lot. It's like over 20%. I mean, it's a lot of turnover. You would say, well, they're a terrible company. No, they're not a terrible company. That's how that system works, right? But if you have turnover like that in a professional services firm, well, man, you're doing something wrong. There's something drastically wrong with that, right? So there's nothing wrong with a law firm being a law firm, right? And maybe they just, you look at these variables and you change the dials a little bit, which might instruct you to change some of the protocols, right? Loosen up a little bit, just not be so rigid about, well, this is the way we always done it. You have to change those things. Yes, you want to shift those things, but no immediate shift overnight. But you just need to know what those variables are. You need to understand the culture, the people. You need to understand the nature. You need to understand the behaviors, the motivators. You need to know how you control people. You need to understand the culture. You need to understand the climate. You need to understand the overall environment. When you look at all those things, it becomes obvious what you need to do.
Maybe we could find a way to further illustrate this, is that not everybody, again, that idea that what is happening in Silicon Valley, and I hate just saying Silicon Valley, because it's more about what a tech firm or a startup looks like. A tech firm and a startup, they're recruiting a different type of worker than a lot of other industries, which means that these other industries can't do the same thing. What a 25-year-old, 26-year-old tech worker has built as an expectation for their work environment is different than a 50-year-old widget maker who's made widgets for the last 20 or 30 years. The construct of that work environment for that widget maker is different. That widget worker can't have the same freedoms as the tech or the startup worker, because widgets have certain specifications. You have to make sure that everything is right when that widget comes out, because when I use that widget, I need it to work. And if your boss has given you freedom to make the widget however you want, it may not work when it gets to me and I paid for it.
Right.
So I think that's a really important point that you made in identifying how you need to understand the contingencies. And I think that's really important.
And I think what's also good to illustrate is we don't want to make it sound like anyone's better than the other, because that widget maker, right, or that engineer that's writing code, or that engineer that's drawing these really cool parts and systems, right? They love being an engineer. There's nothing wrong with that, right? They don't have to be transformational, right? And the whole premise of saying, well, we have to make everybody transformational is probably a myth, right? Yes, some firms will be mostly transformational, but this whole idea of that everybody has to become this different. No, it doesn't matter. The widget maker is happy making widgets. If he doesn't want to make, or she doesn't want to make widgets anymore, she can look around and say, geez, I would really like to be more collaborative and creative. Let me go work in marketing, right? And that's not unusual.
But wouldn't you also say too that where sometimes transactional leadership gets described as bad and transformational gets described as good?
Exactly.
But it's really a sliding scale, because there are certain aspects of every single job that are where your skills as a transactional leader are important, and there are other parts of your job where your skills as a transformational leader are important. So it's not like you're a transformational leader every minute of the day, every single day, 365. There are days where you have to manage as a leader how to use that sliding scale to connect with your employee and perform your job function.
Yeah. They have a great little example of this, right? So when IBM started along, it's so I'm a little older. I'm gonna give you a little older example, but it really brings this up. It really illustrates this. Big, long history company, really invented computers, if you will, or was a really leader in really making applications for computers useful, like from the 60s forward, right? And then somewhere, at one time when you went to your workplace in the 80s, right, you would have these kind of dumb computers, like dumb boxes in your office, right? And there was wires coming out of everywhere, and they would run all the way through the ceilings, all through the building. So, if a company had 10 computers, they were all physically wired, right? And they also had the physically wired, printers and, other things that they had. Everything was connected. That's how the system worked. And it went to a big, that's how it worked. Distributed computing came out, which is like, it started with like Lotus, Apple came out with their computer, then IBM came out with theirs, and there was this competition for making the distributed computers that they weren't connected necessarily to the system, and then the cloud came, and the story goes that IBM the IBM executives were watching the Olympics stream through the TV, and someone said, "How do we make money off of this?" Right? Wow, you make money off this by really digging into the internet. The internet took off, right? So think about an old company that filled with engineers and really, really brilliant people that invented this stuff, right? All of a sudden, are getting beat out by little companies like Dell and Lotus at the time, and so they're getting beat out both with hardware and software by these outside, and Apple. They're getting beat out by these companies that are filled with young people that just like woke up and started this stuff, right? And so what do you do? So they were losing that battle, right? And what they end up doing is IBM. Long story. So if you look at their, they started here and they kind of went up the curve and they were peaking really, right? And then they started losing ground because of the distributed computing. And what did they do? They said they took their very talented engineers that they have, all these really smart people, and they turned them into consultants. And IBM became one of the largest consultant companies in the world. And they consulted on technology, right? They reinvented themselves. So they went from very rational companies. They probably started out very transformational, new ideas. They probably had old-fashioned procedures, and because it was the 60s and 70s and the 80s. But they had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And then as they started getting that market really solid, their products became somewhat commoditized, if you will, or kind of like they couldn't keep up with the new stuff, and they were moving more to the rational side, right? So, their work was the same every day. They were making the same products. They were trying to cross-sell existing products, but they were all trying to do the same thing. But when they changed themselves to an engineering company, they went back to being transformational. They went back to being open. They went back to, people being, to a different kind of mindset. Everybody has a fear of public speaking, right? That's kind of a pretty normal thing. It's been documented. Some people would rather die than speak in public, right? And in professional life, you kind of have to. You have to learn to do that. And, when we were talking to groups or with clients, I'll always hear, you'll hear the same thing. Well, listen, I'm an introvert and I don't like doing it. It's just not me. And that is such a myth, right? Just because someone's an introvert doesn't mean that they can't articulate their ideas. Now, they might feel like they can't articulate the ideas because the rest of the world rewards extroversion, right? The dynamic speaker, the person that gets up there and makes everybody laugh, and you've seen these public speakers with a thing on their ear and they're walking around the room, doing the TED Talk, right? And that's horrifying to an introvert. That's horrible. Like, I could never do that, right? But it's not true. You have to work through that, right? Just like the extrovert has to learn to build on-ramps for people to interrupt them. And they have to learn how to listen better. And they just have to activate those muscles. So I don't mind talking. I can just tell you, I remember being in marketing class in undergraduate school, and Professor Burt, who I totally admired, He's still kind of, I still think of him as a mentor of mine. He's still around. He went and got his doctorate after I got mine, which is kind of cool. Great guy. He called me in class. I was a freshman, freshman marketing. Yes, Russell, what's your opinion? And I remember going, like literally going, like I couldn't talk. I remember I had anxiety. I couldn't talk. I was like, and he looked at me for a little while, and he was so kind. He said, "What about you, Bill?" Like he just moved on from me, right? And I remember something similar happened to me in grammar school. Like I was like, I'm petrified to speak in front of people, right? Believe it or not, this is how bad it was for me. And then, I got into this field, and I had to learn how to facilitate meetings, and I had to learn how to do certain things, and it was hard for me. And I remember going to a facilitation course in New York back when, long time ago, when I started transitioning into this work, and I said to the professor afterwards, I can't write on the board, and I really have a hard time speaking. And she just said, forget it. Like, just be yourself. Like, don't try. You're trying to be somebody else. And so I took her advice, and I tried to be more of myself, and the reaction was good, right? And then I got a chance to teach a course at a technical college, and I got to. They asked me to teach marketing at a technical college, and I remember being so paralyzed and petrified. Right? These are incoming freshmen, tech. I mean, not tech school, but like a community college, right? Incoming freshmen, they don't know college, they don't know me, right? I certainly know more than they do about the subject, but to me it was horrifying and petrifying. And I remember calling friends that were teachers, and I tried to get all this, and I just had to push through it. And after the first class, I got through it. I realized second class, third class, right? And then it got easier and easier and easier for me. So when I'm facilitating, or when I'm teaching, or when I'm talking to people, I'm doing my job. I'm not thinking about, well, I'm not like that. I'm an introverted person. I'm not thinking about that. I'm just thinking about, my job is to transfer information and help people about something I'm passionate about, right? And all that stuff goes away. And I think that, and just to talk about that for a second, right? If the world was made up of all extroverts, the world would be gone by now. We would have killed ourselves. We would have destroyed the world, right? And if the world was made up of all introverts, maybe we wouldn't have progressed as quickly. We wouldn't have taken as many risks, right? Maybe you'd say that. And I think the stats are that half the population, close to half the population, like 51-49, are introvert, extrovert, something like that. That's got to be part of our nature, right? Part of our nature is, the world produces so many men and so many women. It produces so many introverts, so many extroverts. This is our nature. This is how this is our biology. This is the evolution of us, right? And it's done that way because it's important, right? We like to say diversity is so important. Men, women, people of color, people of different backgrounds, people of different functional backgrounds. Like, we love this, right? We know the value that brings to our company, but we really don't value the introverts, because, the person that's going to speak up is the person that looks like, oh, that person must be the dynamic one. And that is so not true, right? And you can go out, history, and look at people that were introverts. Elon Musk is a good example, right? I mean, Elon Musk, I think Bill Gates. I mean, you can go on and on, the people in history that were introverts, and it's so it doesn't mean you're going to be successful or not. And I think what we should do really is we have to learn to communicate so that we're listening and hearing each other in an open way, and stop being judgmental about that. And not only I don't necessarily think companies are judgmental about that in their workers, but people have to stop being judgmental about themselves. Like, just because and by the way, I'm an introvert. Just because I'm an introvert does not mean that I can't teach college or facilitate a meeting, or, it makes me really good at coaching, because the intimacy, right, the ability to connect with people in a deep way, that fills me with joy. And I do get stressed out about social events and things like that, but I've learned to deal with it my own way. And that's what we have that's what we have to do.
So in reality, do you think that as a leadership coach, presenting ways to help leaders engage in those introverts, because we're going to gravitate as leaders, we're going to gravitate to those extroverts, those people who we may be able to connect with. Like, as me as an extroverted leader, I'm going to connect more closely with an extroverted employee rather than the introverted. I'm going to say, what's wrong with that employee? They're not talking, or they're not sharing ideas. Maybe they're not a good employee. But in reality, the way that they process and the way that they present their ideas are going to be much different than the extroverted employee. So, how do you engage that introverted employee? How do you shift your focus and provide them with kind of a safe harbor to make them feel comfortable, but also share those amazing ideas that they have that you could benefit from? You're just not hearing them because they're so quiet.
The bigger answer, I think, is you create a culture where people are all valued. That's one way, including that. But the for the leader, or for the team leader, or for the team member, is you got to give them space to talk. Because when I coach an introvert, right, they say, yeah, he didn't stop talking, so I didn't want to give my opinion. Big problem, right? Or you talk to the extrovert and you say, I don't know why he didn't speak up in the meeting. Well, you didn't give him a chance to speak up in the meeting, right? Like, there's got to be this, we have to listen. And there is some research about communication styles, like different people have communication styles. Like my communication style is I like to collaborate. So to me, it's like we can interrupt each other and we can do all this stuff, right? That would freak some people out, and they go, this guy's crazy, right? Or if someone has a communication style that's very deliberate and very paced, right? I might get frustrated with that and block them out. So it's really learning how to kind of understand, meet people where they are. And that's the real answer. We need to meet people where they are and appreciate these different things. But I can tell you firsthand that I know executives, like senior executives that are on an executive team that are brilliant, that aren't being used to the full extent. Now, my coaching with them is you have to develop some muscles to get in there, right? And that's a little harder to do. I will share with you one example. I work with an executive team, and great team. First of all, we only get hired by really good companies. Like these, they're already really good. There's nothing wrong with they. It was just trying, how do I be a really good team? And they're going through some change, and they really wanted to, do well. And we did 360 feedback. So so this one person, he got feedback that said, I want to hear his voice more. I want to hear him talk more, right? He should speak up more. I feel like he's not doing what he needs to do. Like, it was all very positive, but like basically saying to him, we love what you have to say. We need you to, say it more. Okay. When we did the 360 debrief and we showed the data and we showed the comments, right? And my clients is saying to everybody, so what is it that you want to see? Tell me, I need to know. And the whole team said, really nothing more. You do everything right. You're always saying that. And I'm like, well, why did you guys say all this stuff? And they said, well, we said it because we didn't want him to be misinterpreted. The point is that they were afraid for him, because in their brain, if you're quiet, right, other people might not see you as strong, but they saw him as strong. So that it was just the fear of caring about him because of these biases we have. We're saying, so they came to the conclusion that he's fine the way he is. Like, this is ridiculous, right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating, right? But I don't buy when someone tells me that, they can't, write a paper because they're an extrovert, or they can't, be a salesperson because they're an introvert, or whatever they say. It's just so much self-talk. You said you're an extrovert?
Yeah.
Kind of transitioning to be an introvert? Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the way, that experience with that executive that I just told you, I didn't realize that I've been on the premise that I'm an extrovert because I think I wanted to be, and I've been fighting to always do stuff. But when I read this book, I realized that I'm really an introvert, and there's lots of reasons why, and that all of my efforts and all of my drive and all my things that I always put myself out there, right, has always been a battle. It has not been a natural transition for me. right? And I think that, going from not being able to speak up in a class, right, to facilitating 100 people in a room to do strategic planning or culture or teamwork, whatever, right, to be able to do those things are totally not aligned, and to get there, and I'm not the best at it necessarily, but I'm just myself. I've resigned to the fact that I'm going to be myself. I'm going to do it. I am what I am, and the results are what they are, and just kept learning and learning and learning and muscle until you get there, and that's or I would be probably just as happy working for someone who's doing this and helping them, which is why probably I love coaching so much, right? I get to work with them behind the scenes, like, if you will, right? It's more intimate. That's probably why I got attracted to this in the first place.
Yeah, that intimate one-on-one setting kind of provides like a special place for you, because if you're naturally introverted, then that one-on-one setting is going to be something that you're going to find more rewarding than talking up, in a meeting or in front of other people.
Yeah. So now I've got to the point where it's like we always get a little nervous walking into the room. Always the fear that the wild animal is going to come out, but it never does. It's like I've learned to maneuver, and if things go wrong, I have ways out of it. I know how to, so I'm more comfortable with it now.
I come from a particular background. Like, I understand leadership and culture in a different way. And I think mine's more like boots on the ground, actionable. Like, I'm the guy that you would have been coaching, along the way. But my background in experiences have informed my vision of culture and what culture means. And when I think of culture, I think of, teamwork. And that was a reputation that I had coming up in my organization, was I would take low functioning teams and turn them into high functioning teams. I took over the worst locations and transformed them, in a year and a half. But your theoretical perspectives for me are very important, because I think that that's what this book is about taking theoretical perspectives and then turning them into
boots on the ground.
But it's about taking that theoretical perspective and turning it into a story that is relatable.
So just want to go back to so you're like, well, I'm more boots on the ground, and I've kind of done it by instinct, right? Because you have the right instincts. You evaluated you're thoughtful. You evaluate what people need. You don't just say, this is how I've always done it and this is the way we're going to do it. You evaluate what they need. You meet them where they are. You give them what they need. You might not be thinking of it so aligned like I am, but your nature and your personality is that you have these skills. And that's why there are people, there are great leaders that do this so well, and they've never read a book on this at all. Like they do what their parents taught them. Right? They learned this stuff in their family. They had a coach in college. They had, they just, as they kind of evolve, they kind of develop these skills. And so, yes, you have those skills, but it helps to have a framework too, to think about it, right? Maybe a little bit differently.
Correct. And that framework is really important, because one of my biggest issues in organizations, or particularly the one that I was involved in, was that we take these people who had amazing skills at selling or sales development, and then we'd throw them into these leadership roles without giving them any foundation of leadership and expecting them to perform leadership functions. And, again, that's why this book is important to me, because we're trying to give foundational pieces to people who maybe haven't ever received them. They excelled as boots on the ground or as a worker, and then they've been pushed into these leadership roles and then kept getting pushed. So you may be working with CEOs who have never received that training. They've received their promotion because of their sales effort or something else, but not because of their skills as a leader. And I just think that's really important.
But what happens is the people that have these skills naturally will float to the surface. So, and by the way, you'd be surprised, Michael, how many CEOs have had sales experience. In fact, it's not unusual for the person that started a company that was a salesperson, found their way up to be CEO or senior executive. And the reason is because they seem to have these relational skills. Like, they're not, they've had to maneuver and control their behaviors and think about things a little bit differently. certain the engineers that come up are the people that have these skills. I have a client right now that has he just got a huge job. I mean, I'm not going to say what it is. All I'm telling you is that it's a huge job. And he came to my office and he says, I feel like fraud. Like, I can't believe that they've hired me for this. I can't believe they're paying me this much. And I'm like, well, why? He says, because, like, I don't know. I mean, it's like, I'm like, did you lie to them in the interview? Did you, he probably talked to 30 people before he got this job, right? So did you lie to them? Did you misrepresent yourself? He's like, no. I'm like, they didn't hire you for anything. They hired you because they liked you. You're relatable. You're authentic, right? You listen to them, right? You had all of these other skills that made you beat out 30 other candidates. And by the way, he was told there were 30 candidates. Wow. Right? So he didn't get hired. What do they call it? It's not. There was just an article I read. It was soft power, not hard power, but soft power. By the way, I hate the phrase soft skills. It makes me crazy when people say that. It kind of minimizes this stuff. But soft power is a great phrase. He has soft power, right? Which is the power to relate to people, make people feel a certain way, build confidence in other people, right? That's why he got the job. And that he left the office. He said, I feel better now. But I'm sure the next time I see him, he's going to feel the same way. All right, Michael, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Talk to you next week.
All right.